Okay, so now we're going to talk about dividing a polynomial by a polynomial. What you want to do before you begin is you want to make sure that both your divisor and your dividend are in standard form. So if we look at number 5 on your practice sheet here, I'm just going to recopy it here. N to the fourth minus 18n to the third plus 74n squared plus 57n plus 31. And I'm going to divide this whole thing by n minus 10. So I want to check for two things. Is this in standard form and this? So remember what standard form is. All your exponents have to be in order. 4, 3, 2, 1, none. And this one's all set too. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're in standard form. If they're not, rearrange them so that they are. Then the other thing that you need to remember, if any of your degrees are skipped over, you need to put in what we call a zero placeholder. So for example, let's just pretend that it went n to the fourth and there was no n to the third term, right? And it just had plus n squared plus n plus 1. I don't know, pretend. So if you saw this and you're like, oh, there is no third term, you literally need to write in plus 0n to the third. Every exponent needs to be represented. So whichever the highest one is, you start there, and every single one below that needs to be there. So if you're missing one, you have to plug in a 0 placeholder. Okay? And you'll see why in just a minute. So we'll do an example. I'll make sure that we do one that is missing an exponent. Okay, so when we go to divide the polynomials by polynomials, get them both in standard form, put in any missing placeholders if you need them, and then I'm going to write it just like I do long division of my other numbers. So I'm going to take my divisor, put it on the outside. So I'll have n minus 10, and then that big old divide bar, and then I put all this in there, n to the fourth, 18n to the third. Okay, so just like we did long division with numbers, we do the same with polynomials. Yay. There is a slight difference here. You're going to ask your question in your head a little bit different. So here's what I ask myself. I actually don't even look at this number here. I'm just looking at this first term, n. And I ask myself, what do I multiply n by to get n to the fourth? N to the third. So whatever that answer is going to go up top. But here's the other thing. I want to keep all of my degrees lined up. That's why if you're missing one, you need to put in a 0 placeholder. So n to the third, I'm going to put it over the n to the third column. So everything in this line will be n to the third. Everything in this line will be n squared, n to the first, and so on. Okay, so you're going to need that 0 placeholder if you're missing one. So what do I multiply n by to get n to the fourth? The answer was n to the third. Now, just like you did with numbers, you take the number on top and you multiply by what's out in front. And you're going to write it underneath. So n to the third times n is n to the fourth. And n to the third times negative 10 is negative 10 n to the third. But then, just like with the numbers, what do you do now? You subtract. Here's another little difference. You have to subtract both of these things. So this is now a minus, and then what happens here? Plus. He turns into a plus, because minus and negative turns into a plus. Be careful of that. This first term should always cancel out. Always. If it doesn't cancel, something's wrong. And now, negative 18n to the third plus 10n to the third leaves me with negative 8n to the third. You follow me so far? Everybody's okay? All right. And now, in numbers, what did you normally do? After you subtract, you then bring down the next number. Same thing. So I'm going to bring down the next term, plus 74n squared. And then, guys, you just keep repeating this process. You ask yourself, what do I multiply n by to get negative 8n to the third? Negative 8n squared, so that goes up top in the n squared column. You follow me? All right. Now I take negative 8n squared and multiply by what's out in front. So I'd get negative 8n to the third plus 80n squared. You agree? Yes. But then you have to Then you have to subtract. So now what happens, this turns into a plus, and this turns into a minus. I literally cross out the plus signs and write a minus because it gets too confusing. If you just try and like darken it over, ugh, that drives me crazy. First terms cancel just like they're supposed to. And then a negative 74, I'm sorry, positive 74 minus 80 leaves me with negative 6n squared. And then you just keep repeating this process until I run out of numbers. What do you multiply n by to get negative 6n squared? Negative 6n, so that goes up on the top. Multiply that by what's out in front. But then you need to subtract. So that turns into a plus, that turns into a minus, cancels just like it's supposed to. And then what do I multiply n by to get negative 3n? Negative 3. So negative 3 up top, do negative 3 times all that. But then I have to subtract this, so now you're a plus, you're a minus, cancels. I have a remainder of 1. So, because it's a positive 1, I'm going to go back up to the top and I write plus 1 over n minus 10. If it had been a negative number, right, because I could reasonably get a negative number as my remainder, I would just have a minus whatever the number is over what I'm dividing by. So this whole top thing is my answer.
Yeah, this takes forever.
But it's way faster once you're, doing it on your own. It's just the process, right? So once you get the process, hopefully it will make some sense. Okay, so there's our final answer.
What about trinomials? Just the same thing?